The title for today's homily came from Yogi Berra, the New York Yankees catcher and coach. Such prophetic words. Deja vu all over again. There are several times in my life when the changes and subsequent transitions that I've made have been transformational. Some of them, most of them, were by choice, some were not. One of the books that I read to prepare for today, Life is in the Transitions by Bruce Feiler, suggested that it is living in and through these events, which he calls disruptors, can perhaps come our greatest growth. I thought easy for him to say, and then I thought about my life, and I thought about the lives of all of you that we have experienced. So journey with me through several transitions, and perhaps you can reflect on your own. Finally, I'd like us to remember the transitions through which we have moved as a congregation, the results of taking a chance again and again, and how those changes have paved the way for this new beginning, which we face with optimism and confidence. So here we go. 55 years ago, in San Francisco, during the Summer of Love, I experienced everything that Northern California had to offer, starting with Irish coffee at the Buena Vista and going to every tourist thing that you can think about. My first husband and I had a childhood friend, so we stayed with him for that entire month. I returned again in 1971 and in 1972 on my own to a community college convention representing Staten Island Community College. So as would happen when people from all over the country were gathered, someone would say, well, where are we going to eat? And I would say, well, what kind of food do you like? Italian. Okay, we'll go to North Beach. Well, what about seafood? No, we will not go to the wharf. We will find some other places. And so somebody said to me, do you live here? And I said, no. But in the back of my mind, I said, I wish I did. And so it wasn't until I was sitting on George's deck looking out at the Sutro Tower that I saw Freddie the Fog seeping in, going down, bypassing Noe Valley. And I thought, why do I feel so at home here? Why do I feel so alive? And the words that we read today in The Road Not Taken, and Thoreau's words, if a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it's because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music when he hears, however measured or far away. Now, I heard those words when I was 26 taking sophomore English while I was getting my bachelor's degree after nursing school, walking to the tune of a different drum. Well, that was it. Staten Island was too small, too restricted, too conservative, the only Republican borough in the entire city of New York. It would take you nearly 2 hours to get to mid-Manhattan to see a play, a show, an opera, and even longer to get further uptown to hear Leonard Bernstein. Take the road less traveled. Take a chance. I returned home from that solo trip and announced, I want to move to San Francisco. Will you come with me? And he said yes. So remembering the old adage from Benjamin Franklin, a failure to plan is a plan to fail, we planned as much as we could. My parents had already moved to Florida, so that was one transition. Said goodbye to childhood friends and to my twin brother and family, my in-laws. Now, I had an RN license waiting for me, which was fortuitous because at that time, not every state had the same regulations for licensure. So I got my original license in 1959, and I said, thank you, God, I don't have to take a state board exam again. I just sent them the results from New York, and voila, I was licensed in California. We stayed with our childhood friend for 6 weeks until our house sold and our furniture arrived. I joined St. Aidan's Episcopal Church, and we got a flat at the intersection of 17th and Stanyan. Now, how beautiful was that? I could ride my bike through Golden Gate Park to the Pacific Ocean on any day off. I was healthy enough to do it there and back. Now, there are some things that came as second nature to me, and that was being a nurse. So I signed up with a registry, which meant I was in a different hospital every day, or maybe even for 2 or 3 days at a time. But one night I got to a hospital, and I said, who's in charge? And they said, you. Well, it wasn't exactly a time for expletive deleted, but I said, okay, who's the supervisor of the unit? Who are the sickest patients? Let's do a narcotic count. Who are the other people on my team? It all came back. So on one fell swoop, I got a job. I moved from a home that I called home for 35 years. I could not have believed how happy I was. Life is in the transitions, and sometimes they're called disruptors. They can be anticipated. Think about the jobs you have moved from. Think about the downsizing you have had. Think about the times when you haven't had a job and this community held you up. I can look around and see any number of people who have had open heart surgery, recovered from a stroke, had a replacement of a knee or a hip. Can you see yourselves? And I can also remember how we have held each other through the times of loss. And I remember Isabel being born, and now she's learning her ABCs. So when we look at some of those changes, a lot of reading on the subject says we face them with fear. Well, I never felt that fear when I moved from Staten Island. But in the fall of that year, as I went from hospital to hospital, a new adventure every day was really wearing thin. I joined the Nurses Association and answered an advertisement for something called a nurse representative. And Bob, this is the Nurses Association euphemism for shop steward. My father could not have been happier. I mean, there are all kinds of jobs that I've had in my life, but he was a union organizer in 1935, and so he thought that was wonderful. And while I had done grievance handling and grievance investigations on Staten Island, I thought, I can do this. It's just another way to look at problem solving. 5 years later, wham, I'm 40, I'm divorced, I'm living alone for the first time in my life. My financial situation dramatically improved because my salary was my own and I wasn't paying alimony, which came as a surprise to me because I did not remember that California was a community property state, and since I had been the main source of income in our couple, that might happen, but it didn't. So change refers to an alteration or a modification, moving from one state to another. Transition refers to the process that we go through to get there. So changes, moving from being married to being divorced to being single. Transition, the psychological, emotional process that I moved through. This ending was not abrupt. Feeler calls this the long goodbye and says the next phase is the messy middle, and it can last for a long time. Now, the one question that we did not anticipate, and I had not yet had my 3-unit course in my doctoral program on decision making, we did not anticipate what could go wrong. So San Francisco was a difficult transition for my first husband, who was a freelance artist. I jokingly say it was more free than Lance. So after 3 years, I could not sustain being the emotional, financial support of our relationship. So at that time, therapy was $35 an hour, covered by health insurance, and nobody said, you have 5 sessions and that's it. So the first phase was, what do I do to make things better? And after another year, the second question was, what do I do to leave? I had a therapist who was a behaviorist, so we weren't doing Freudian analysis. We were looking at, where are you, where do you want to go, and what do you need to do to get there? Now, what made it hard was the promise that I had made in 1959 before God and 125 people, till death do us part. I was the first in my family of origin to move away from my home and to get divorced. Now, I wasn't exactly wearing a scarlet A on my back, but that whole notion of divorce was strange. But one of my friends, an Episcopal minister, said, could I look at what was going on as the death of a relationship? Now, Teresa was a psychologist, and I said, that's the best rationalization I have ever heard of. And yet, what I hadn't faced was what was my fear. So that's what my therapist asked me, of what are you afraid? I said, well, that I would be supporting myself for the rest of my life. To which he responded, what have you been doing for the last 15 years? Duh. And then I said, I'm afraid I'm going to be celibate the rest of my life, and he laughed. The Right Reverend Marian Bood, the Bishop of Washington, in her book, How We Learn to Be Brave, talks about the courage to stay and the courage to leave. This tension is often referred to as cognitive dissonance, where the pain of changing or leaving is less than the pain of staying. At that point, change will happen. We divorced in May of 1978, and I acknowledged that ritual by going to Ocean Beach in San Francisco and writing on the sand, October 3rd, 1959, May 18th, 1978, Millie Hegerman became Mileva Saulo. Now, we have journeyed with each other in all kinds of transitions. We celebrate them, we honor them, and we realize that each of us responds to them differently. There is no one way, there is only the way that you have chosen, and we walk together in grace and in love and in care. So now I'm going to talk very briefly about a transition that I did not make myself, but one that was imposed upon me. I had a great job with the Critical Care Nurses Association in Southern California, in Orange County, where, believe it or not, I found a group of Democrats and a liberal Episcopal church. So for 50 weekends out of 100, I was away from home. Now, you might think visiting big cities and even little cities in Iowa and Ohio can be exciting, but it was really difficult to put down roots. Forget about dating. With my schedule, okay, I can see you a week from Tuesday or 3 weeks from next week. So what happened next was that I was invited to take a job in Los Angeles by the firm that I had worked for in San Francisco, because the whole department in the contract negotiation of CNA was fired. I talked with my friends at the Labor Center in Berkeley, and they said, we're not quite sure this one's going to hold. And they didn't think that it would. So this time, I did anticipate what could go wrong. And I negotiated 3 months of salary, a severance, and working with an outplacement group in the event that I got fired. So while Feeler talks about disruptors, he also talks about life quakes. So think about an earthquake and aftershocks. So 8 weeks after I took the job, 2 weeks after my father died, the court returned all of those people to their jobs, and I was out of one. I couldn't figure out what happened to me. I didn't resign, I wasn't fired, but it was an interesting time because a colleague in Long Beach and I realized that we had some skills to offer the Long Beach community because of all the airline factories that were closing. So we did job search workshops, and one of the things we suggested to people when you went out to a party, you know what people always say, "What do you do?" Which means, what kind of a job do you have? And we would say, "I'm a job seeker. Can you help me?" So at that point, I worked with an outplacement group where my counselor was the head of the company, and he was a Seventh-day Adventist, and he understood that I was not just looking for a job, but that this was vocation. For me, to what was I being called? Where were my skills? And again and again and again, education, education, education. I had this wonderful friend in Monterey who I would talk to about jobs or transition, and if she thought that I was going to make a decision that was not good for me, she would say, "Mileva!" I mean, can't you just hear it on her voice? "What are you, crazy?" But with this one, she said, "Yes!" So I joined the faculty at USC. It was a perfect fit. Even though I was earning $20,000 less a year than I had been learning, but in 2 years, an accreditation group said to USC, "Raise their salaries or we're going to close you down." So the transition that I did not choose took me back into an arena that I dearly loved. And then a colleague, when the department was going to close, said, "You know what? They're looking for a dean for the School of Nursing in Oakland. Are you interested?" Well, guess what? That was 2000. I moved, and the rest is history. I could not have planned that life. And there are things that have happened to us in our congregation that we could not and did not plan either. So let me just walk through several. First, there was an idea that we might use our property towards some other social good. What about a Montessori school or a parsonage? And we did do our due diligence. We looked at a planning model, a decision-making model, and we looked at what could go wrong. And we realized that the changes physically that we would have to make would make any REAP on an investment impossible. And while we were sad about that, we also realized that we had the church's best interest at heart, and the risks were too great. Now, all of you remember what happened in the spring of 2021. COVID hit. It came out of nowhere, unanticipated, unknown, faced with the chaos of the administration at that time. None of us knew what would happen. And when I talked to my healthcare colleagues, they didn't either. They were inventing it as they went along. But how did we respond? Quickly and with clarity of our values and our purpose, we did lock down in March of 2021, and we reinvented worship. We had a tech team, bar none the best ever. And they led the way, not only here, but within the Unitarian Universalist Association community, to develop multi-form worship, which we have done to this day. Maria Christina, our minister at the time, and Lori did an extraordinary job of ministering to our families and our children. We looked at our values: do no harm, protect the vulnerable among us. We can put up with any inconvenience as long as it keeps all of us safe. This wasn't about the individual, this was about the community. And we believed in good science. So I do remember May of 2023, we regathered. I don't know if you can remember, but there were people cleaning windows inside and out, vacuuming, dusting, getting rid of stuff in the cottages. But it was not just house cleaning, is that we are coming together to a new beginning. Now, we also looked at a new beginning when Maria Christina left to go to the church in Bellevue. When in January of 2023, Rev. Ruth, our minister, helped us to see our endowment as a resource and suggested, along with the finance committee that developed our 5-year sustainability plan, that our church would not grow without a family ministry. There was no guarantee, but we were pretty sure that if we didn't have one, we wouldn't grow. She also suggested we hire a tech, we hire an admin assistant, all of which we have just done. We became a learning community, learning about conflict, anti-racism. We updated our covenant of right relations. We changed the money manager of our Memorial Endowment Fund. We updated our bylaws to allow more flexible use of the endowment. And thanks to Terry, we divested from Tesla, and our endowment is still doing very well. Every member of this congregation committed to a pledge for this next year. We had a successful service auction, one of our best ever. Through special plates, we have donated $18,000 to homeless shelters, to food pantries, to the UUA, to justice. We advocate on street corners and everywhere that you can imagine. And we continue to gather each Sunday for spiritual nurturing and fellowship. And the search team brought us Eric. What does this tell you about us? We are awesome. Can I hear an hallelujah and an amen? All right. Now, many of the changes that I outlined can be measured by some kind of an outcome. But that's an incomplete story. What I haven't captured is the heart or spirit and the love of this community. 9 months ago, can you believe it? 9 months ago, I had my heart surgery. You were a part of a larger circle that held me in love, whether you call it prayer or good thoughts. I've told you before what it felt like to be surrounded and held by that love. It was priceless. I'm going into a surgery that no one knew whether it would be good or bad, and yet I felt calm. You helped me to bear that day with grace. And that is the gift that we bring to each other and to our hurting community in need of our love. One of the most common responses to any change and transition, the literature tells us, is fear. So hear what Maya Angelou has to say about it. Hope and fear cannot exist in the same space. Invite one to stay. Hear what Rumi says on the subject. Fear is a guest who leaves when you refuse to serve it. Yes, deja vu all over again. Now, Lawrence Peter Yogi Berra was known for a number of yogiisms. So let me conclude with 2. You've got to be very careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. Amen. Ashe. Blessed be.